Hey, Yang Gang, KMO here with another Out of My Head video. And you've complained that the people I've been bringing on to talk about universal basic income have been universally against it. I've got somebody here who I think perhaps maybe will have a different view. Calum Chase, it's good to talk to you again.
Hi, KMO. It's good to be here again.
So the last time we spoke, the topic was the economic singularity. And you were talking about how information technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, all those buzz phrases, they're buzz phrases now. They weren't when we talked. That these are going to be generating enormous wealth and enormous changes in our economic system, and probably changes in the way that we make our living and the way that we organize our societies. We now have a candidate here in the United States running for president. His name is Andrew Yang, and his primary policy proposal is the universal basic income, which he calls the freedom dividend. And he freely admits that that name was arrived at through marketing means and test audiences and such. I wonder what your opinion is on Andrew Yang as a candidate and the universal basic income as a response to job loss due to automation.
Okay, well, first up, I'm really sorry. I think I'm going to disappoint your audience if they're looking for
Oh no!
if they're looking for unalloyed enthusiasm about UBI. But look, Andrew Yang, I obviously I'm in the UK, so what do I know about US elections? But he looks like a long shot. However, it is great that there is a candidate who takes seriously the enormous changes that are coming to our societies because of the technology developments, because of AI. And particularly when you have members of the Senate, when they're quizzing Mark Zuckerberg and they don't realize that Facebook is funded by advertising. So that's refreshing. And let me tell you, it is not restricted to the US, this lack of understanding of what's coming. The UK Parliament is currently squabbling about whether we should live in the 13th or the 15th century. Most MPs appear to have no clue about what's coming. So Andrew Yang's a breath of fresh air. But unfortunately, on universal basic income, I do not think it is the solution to what's coming, but at least it means people are thinking about it. And at least people are thinking about, well, if automation happens, how do we generate income for those of us who no longer have jobs? So it's asking the right question, but I don't think it's the right answer. And it's great that it's asking the right question, because most people, not just politicians, are not thinking seriously about the possibility of automation. So this is the first really big hurdle. When you say to people, when people ask themselves the question, when it's asked in the media, will machines take over our jobs? The default answer at the moment seems to be, no, of course they won't. We'll work with machines, and automation hasn't caused lasting widespread unemployment in the past, and therefore it won't in the future. And that is really short-sighted. It's true in the next 5 years. It's true in the next 10, probably 15 years. But when you look beyond that, the idea that machines, which by then will be 8,000 to 1,000,000 times smarter than us because of Moore's law, which is not dead and it's not dying, the idea that those machines won't take most of the jobs we do right now is ludicrous. Of course they will. Will we create lots of new jobs that for some reasons the machines can't do? Well, possibly, but I highly doubt it. So I think we are going to have to face up to the possibility that we're heading towards a world where there are not enough jobs for humans. I mean, really not enough jobs, so that half the population or more is perpetually unemployed. Now, the reason why I think universal basic income is not the answer to that is that obviously it requires tax to pay for it. And if you tax rich people, they're very good at hiding their money, and they're very good at running away to jurisdictions where they're not so highly taxed. Even if every single of the 200 odd countries in the world agreed to a tax regime, the rich people would go to the moon or somewhere. They'd find some way of hiding their money. And even if you took all the money away from Zuckerberg and Gates and so on that they have, it doesn't make very much difference to the rest of us. So universal basic income is unaffordable. And even if it wasn't unaffordable, the biggest problem with it is the little word in the middle of the name, basic. It means that all we can do is make everybody poor. Alive, great, but poor. And we have to do much better than that. So it seems to me that the real answer to a jobless future is abundance. It's the idea that all the goods and services that you need for a really good standard of living become really, really cheap. At the moment, although stuff is getting cheaper, and we're replacing answer machines, alarm clocks, notepads with a single device, and in many ways life is getting cheaper, it's still expensive. If we can make everything really cheap, then the taxes which do have to be applied in order to transfer income from those who are still working or those who have assets to the rest of us, they don't have to be onerous, and the rich people don't run away. Now, is it possible to make everything cheap? Yeah, I think it is. And I think it is for three reasons. One is we get humans out of the production process for both goods and services. And guess what? That's exactly what automation does. So that's going to happen. Step two is we make energy really cheap. Now, there's a lot of debate at the moment about whether renewable energy sources are cost competitive with digging up dead dinosaurs. And right now, really, they're not. But they will be soon. And we don't know whether that's in 5 years or 20 years, somewhere in between. But energy, electricity, is going to be really, really cheap in the coming decades. And then the third step is to make all the production processes of goods and services very efficient, which AI will do. So I think in 25, 30 years, we could have an economy of abundance. And I think that is the best answer to the likelihood of automation destroying most of our jobs.
Why do you say that energy will be much cheaper in the future?
Because primarily solar cells are on a declining cost curve. It's an exponentially declining cost curve. So in 20 years, you should be able to put a set of solar cells on your roof. Certainly if you're in a country that has some sunshine. I have the misfortune to live most of the time in a country which does not really have sunshine, needs a roof. But most places you could do that. And if we plaster the Sahara with solar cells, we can generate enough electricity for the rest of the world. We just have to figure out storage and transmission. And those are technological challenges which can be met. But the smartest people looking at this, and Ramez Naam is at the Singularity University is one of the leading thinkers in this, are confident that in 20, 25 years, electricity will be almost too cheap to meter.
So again, you're not a resident or a citizen of the United States, so you don't have quite the same investment in this topic that a lot of the people watching this video do. But what do you say to folks who, and I get comments like this every day, that if Andrew Yang is not elected president, and that if universal basic income is not instituted now rather than later, that we are headed for some serious social unrest because of the vast disparities in wealth, in this nation right now?
Well, okay, so here's something else that I think your listeners are not going to be happy about. They will disagree with me, but the data does not show that we're living in a time of exceptional inequality. If you strip out the top 0.00001%, if you strip out Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and a few others, actually inequality has been fairly stable since the 70s. And historically, it's low. Your and my great-grandparents lived in a world where a tiny number of people, but not as small as the tech giants, leaders, owned most of everything, and everybody else was dirt poor. And we have since then created a middle class, created a really substantial middle class. So we're not living at a time of exceptional unemployment. And is there going to be unrest in the next few years? No, I don't think so, because automation by AI, cognitive automation, is only in its very, very early stages. The AI we have now essentially has stolen the advertising industry from Rupert Murdoch and a few others. And by the way, I think that is why Google and Facebook get such a bad press at the moment, because Murdoch and the media barons are furious and are fighting back, hopelessly, but they're fighting back. But it has barely begun to penetrate the rest of the economy. It will do. The Internet of Things, 5G and so on, will, and the lowering of the hurdles of compute power, AI expertise, and data will allow AI to be diffused through the rest of the economy. This is going to take a couple of decades, and it's only in that time period that automation will replace human workforces. As long as there are some jobs, a reasonable number of jobs, that humans can do and machines can't, then there will be jobs for humans. Because one of the things that automation does is it creates wealth, and wealth creates demand, demand creates jobs. So as long as there are some jobs which humans can do, and that's going to be true for 10, 20 years, then there will be jobs for humans. The UK and the US although a lot of the jobs we have are not brilliant jobs, we are still at close to full employment. And I think that will continue for probably 10, may well be 20 years. It's after that that the really big changes happen that we need to be preparing for now. So I don't see massive unrest due to automation in the next few years, either in the US or the UK. And, we have our lunatic politicians here. We've got a prime minister who is a serial lying, selfish, narcissistic monster who has just effectively launched a coup. We've got Parliament here, he's announced that he's doing something called proroguing Parliament, which means Parliament won't be allowed to sit for over a month, right during the sensitive time when we're about to leave the EU, the biggest structural change that the UK has made for a generation. And a lot of people say this is hyperbole, but I don't think it is to call this a coup. So we've got lots of grounds for unrest, but actually it's got nothing to do with automation. The unrest we have now is a backlash against political correctness. Political correctness is a good thing. It means that it's not okay to be racist. It's not okay to beat up gay people. And so we've had massive progress and women's rights are an important thing. Sorry, that sounded like an afterthought. It wasn't. Political correctness has made terrific progress in the last 20 to 30 years. And in some ways it's gone too far. Some of the no platforming going on in universities in the States and also in the UK goes too far. And there's a backlash against it. And that's the battle that's been fought in the US and the UK political sphere now. We haven't even started the battle over automation yet. That will come later.
I think an important difference between your country and mine is that in the United States, we live under the assumption that employers will provide health care. And the healthcare industry is a for-profit industry, and people who are in desperate need of healthcare become price insensitive. So medical providers, hospitals, and insurance companies have all agreed to basically make desperate people into a profit center at a time when, the assumption is that employers will provide health insurance, but they don't anymore. It is the exceptional job. It is the rare job that resembles the 20th century norm, where employers provided not only health insurance, but retirement benefits, paid vacation, family leave, that sort of thing. Those are the brass ring jobs now. Those are the winning lottery ticket jobs. Most people are performing, if they have a job, it's a service job. It might be part-time and it has no benefits at all. So I think there's maybe a desperation in the air here that it's not palpable where you are.
Yeah, the American health service is a problem. No question.
That's kind of an oxymoron. I mean, we don't have one.
Yeah, well, no, you do. Of course, you do. But it's problematic.
We have a health system.
Yeah,
but it's not a service that is available to somebody just based on citizenship.
Sure. Well, you've got Medicare and Medicaid, which picks up a lot of people. But no, I'm not going to argue that the US health system is a sensible one. Look, I'm an enormous fan of the US. I first came to the US when I was 18 and fell absolutely in love with it. I spent a month in New York and a month in New Mexico, and I loved both ends of the states and everything in between. I think America is a brilliant country. It is still the most powerful and most important country in the world, and I don't knock it. You've got two big problems. Somebody once told me, what's a Canadian? It's an American who has a health plan and doesn't have a gun. And if America could fix those two problems, then that would be really, really good. It isn't to do with profit. It isn't to do with private enterprise. In the UK, we have the NHS, about. It's creaky and inefficient and expensive to run. But we Brits are lucky because if something badly goes wrong with us, the NHS will take care of us and it will not ask us for a credit card. But the doctors, the most doctors in this country are general practitioners, and they are entrepreneurs. They run businesses. They get paid by the state, and they run businesses. There's nothing wrong with profit in the health system, just like there's nothing wrong with profit elsewhere. Profit is a good mechanism. However, the US health system, and I don't know it in enormous detail, but it's clearly structured in ways with lots and lots of perverse incentives. So I think it's true that America spends a higher percentage of its GDP on health, and the outcomes are not commensurate with that. So it needs fixing. It really badly needs fixing, just like your gun laws need fixing. But hey, no country's perfect. There's lots of things that need fixing in every country.
Well, I will correct you on one point. Canadians, they do own firearms, but their culture is different. They don't use them. And I also have to insist at every turn, every time somebody, and you haven't mentioned mass shootings, but it happens a lot here in the States. Uh, gun crimes committed with rifles are minuscule. They're about 3% of gun crimes. Most gun crimes are committed with handguns because they are easily concealed. And every time there is a mass shooting here in the United States, those who are pushing to disarm the population will use these statistical outliers to whip up fear, basically, and to try to use an atmosphere of fear to push through an agenda which is not borne out by the facts and by the statistics of how guns are used to commit crimes.
Well, okay, but there's a very simple fact. Americans are not more violent than other people. Brits are actually quite violent. You watch our football games, particularly when British football fans travel abroad. Brits are quite violent, but we don't kill anything like the numbers that you do because we don't have guns. It's pretty simple, really. And every time there is one of these tragedies, and they are awful occurrences. I mean, the families of the people who get shot in these events, it's just awful. The rest of the world rolls its eyes and thinks, come on, America, why are you not seeing what the rest of us can see? You have too many guns in the hands of the population. Now, I know there's a problem of getting from where you are now to a state where Western Europe is, where you don't have guns in everybody's pockets, but you need to do that. Otherwise, you're going to keep having these incidents. However, maybe we shouldn't dwell too much on that subject.
That is a segue to a very different sort of conversation.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about technology then. So if I could summarize the position that I think you're taking, automation is a seriously disruptive force, but the time to address it still lies in the future if it's going to be addressed, specifically and directly, as with, say, a universal basic income.
Well, I think the time to start thinking about it is now, but the time that we're going to see massive widespread human unemployment is probably at least 15, probably 20 to 30 years in the future. The reason why I think the time to address it is now is when it arrives, or rather when it becomes obvious to most people that it is definitely coming, we need by that point to have a consensus about some possible solutions, maybe not the ideal solution, but some possible solutions. And that point when most people realize that it could well be coming could be quite soon. And I think the thing that might wake everybody up is self-driving vehicles. Now, there's an amazing amount of disagreement about when self-driving vehicles will be ready for prime time. But the smart money is early to middle years of next decade. So by 2023, almost certainly by 2025, you will start to see self-driving taxis and truck drivers with no safety engineer. Now, when that happens, the cost of the technology will, as it always does, it will decline rapidly. And that means that the commercial fleet, which is 5 million drivers in the US, it's 1 million over here, will be automated pretty quickly. People say truck drivers do many other things. They do unloading each end. They get out and help if a load falls off a lorry. But most of those can be automated. It's not too hard to see how that will be done. Anybody operating a commercial vehicle, whether it be a taxi owner, a taxi fleet owner, a trucking fleet owner, is going to have to replace their staff with technology really fast, or they'll go out of business. So I think that by the late 2020s, maybe the mid 2030s, somewhere around there, most commercial drivers will be in another job or unemployed. And as that process happens, most people are going to wake up and think, wow, driving is something we don't let humans do until they're beyond adolescence. Whether they're an accountant or a plumber or a clerk, they're going to think, if machines can do that, they're going to come and get my job in some period. And then they're going to panic. Now, that panic could be really dangerous. Before we have that panic, we need to have a consensus that there are some solutions. And like I say, I don't think universal basic income is a workable solution, but maybe I'm wrong, and maybe somebody can show that that could be the solution. But we need to have a consensus that there are solutions. And right now, our political leaders are not even thinking about it. So that's what we have to change, and the time to start changing that is now. So, which is why I'm really pleased that Andrew Yang has raised the question.
What sort of policy proposal do you think people should be considering that isn't on the table?
Oh, well, I think abundance. I think people should be thinking, is this rather nutty sounding idea that most goods and services could be nearly free in 20, 30 years? Is that economically possible? Is it meaningful? And if so, how do we nudge our way to it? So, for instance, one rather perhaps counterintuitive conclusion I reach is that when lots of drivers, for instance, are being laid off, there's going to be a huge amount of resistance about it. I mean, you've already had truck drivers holding rallies and meetings saying we want self-driving trucks to be banned for 50 years to give us all time to think about it. I'm sorry, but that can't happen. But we do need to be thinking about, and I've lost my train of thought, and it will come back shortly if I keep blethering for long enough. No, it's
Policy
not.
proposals.
Oh, well. Yeah, well, as I say, yes, that's right. So that's it, the counterintuitive thing. So people will say, hey, let's slow down this automation process. I think actually the opposite is likely to be a better solution. We should speed it up, because by speeding up automation, we get to abundance faster. So, that's the sort of thing I think people should be thinking about. But right now, there's very few people thinking along those lines. Now, maybe that's because I'm completely batshit crazy and everybody else isn't. I don't think so.
Of course not. Well, I was talking to a Marxist yesterday about American politics, and I laid this out to him. I said, essentially, we have four visions on offer. Because it doesn't matter what your ideal political philosophy is. If it's not on offer, you can't vote for it. What we have on offer right now is 4 more years of Trump. On the Democratic side, we have the candidates like Joe Biden, who just represent a return to business as usual, what we would call, we who talk about politics would call, neoliberal democratic business as usual. We've got the option of a hard shift to the left, which would really beef up government spending and government institutions. And this is championed by candidates like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And then there's Andrew Yang's vision, and he is openly a capitalist. And he says we need to make capitalism more human-centric, a more humane version of free market capitalism. Those are the 4 viewpoints, the 4 visions on offer. Of those 4, which one do you like the best?
Me, if I could wave a magic wand and make any of those people president, I would probably vote for Andrew Yang. That isn't going to happen. He's not going to get elected, and I don't have a magic wand. And therefore, I would strongly urge people to think seriously about Biden, because he's so much better than the alternative. Sanders and Warren seem to me to be left-wing populists with policies that would be disastrous. And, as such, they're, I think, just as dangerous as the right-wing populists. So, yeah, I'd vote for Yang, but then if I could possibly have a second vote, it would be for Biden.
Well, one of the things that Yang advocates is a change in our electoral procedures. And I think ranked voting is what he's advocating. There's alternatives to winner take all.
Yeah, and your electoral college is another issue. But again, as a Brit, I've got no grounds for commenting on other people's electoral systems. Ours is crazy too.
Well, as you mentioned, your parliament is arguing whether to live in the 13th or the 15th century. What did you mean by that?
Oh, that was just a throwaway, rude remark. But okay. The Brexit to me it seems like a really retrograde step. The European Union is a magnificent institution. It has done something which has been impossible for centuries, which is it stopped the Germans and the French fighting each other, and it has created enormous wealth for EU citizens. It has brought Spain and Portugal back into the community of advanced countries. It's done the same for Central and Eastern Europe. It's a wonderful institution, and for us to leave it's an appalling retrograde step. Europe needs to step up to the plate in artificial intelligence, where it is a way distant third after the US and China, and in many other respects. Europe has a hell of a lot to offer the world. Europe's contribution to world civilization over the last few centuries has been enormous, and to dilute it by taking Britain out of it is to me, it's a tragedy. And I still hope it won't happen. I still hope that Parliament will stop this terrible no-deal version of Brexit happening, and that we'll have another referendum, which will be the 3rd referendum on Europe. And it's clear that the country has changed its mind and has realized that Brexit was sold with a pack of lies. and that we will end up remaining.
I should have checked before we got on the line here, but have you written a more recent book than the last one we talked about?
Not really. There's a book called Artificial Intelligence and the Two Singularities, but that is simply a combination of Surviving AI, which is about the technological singularity, superintelligence, and the economic singularity, which is about the economic singularity, which is unemployment and so on. And my book AI and the Two Singularities is simply a combination of those two. So those are still my current books. They do have second editions now, so rush out and buy them.
Okay. Well, Calum Chase, it has been a pleasure to reconnect with you. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks, Kemba. It's been a pleasure talking to you.